الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نرحب بالحضور خلف الشاشات وعبر المنصة الإلكترونية، ونرحب أيضا بالمتحدثين والمتحدثات في هذه الندوة الافتراضية المجالس البلدية في دول مجموعة العشرين. يسعدني أن أدعو الدكتور زاهر بن عبد الرحمن عثمان لافتتاح هذه الندوة الإلكترونية.
من المؤسف أن تكون هذه الندوة افتراضية. الأمل كان أن تكون على أرض الواقع، لكن أن تكون ندوتنا القادمة بهذا الشكل. It's unfortunate that we are having this symposium as virtual. Hopefully the next one will be in person. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. ابتداء أود أن أرحب بكم جميعا نيابة عن راعي هذه الندوة سمو الأمير عبد العزيز بن محمد بن عياف، رئيس مجلس أمناء جامعة الأمير سلطان، رئيس مجلس إدارة مركز الإدارة المحلية بالجامعة. الشكر لكم على حضوركم ومشاركتكم التي تعتبر إثراء لهذه الندوة. الفرصة أيضا هنا نتقدم لمعالي الأستاذ ماجد الحقيل وزير الشؤون البلدية والقروية المكلف على تفضله بمشاركة الوزارة في تنظيم هذه الندوة. موضوع المجالس البلدية ودورها في إدارة التنمية موضوع مهم جدا، وللمملكة العربية السعودية سبق كبير في هذا المجال، واهتمام لم تغفل عنه رؤية المملكة 2030 التي بادر بها بقيادة ورعاية خادم الحرمين الشريفين الملك سلمان بن عبد العزيز صاحب السمو الملكي الأمير محمد بن سلمان بن عبد العزيز حفظهم الله. وتأتي الندوة التي تنعقد تزامنا مع رئاسة المملكة العربية السعودية لمجموعة العشرين في هذا العام 2020. تأتي الندوة تتويجا لدراسة شاملة للمجالس البلدية في دول مجموعة العشرين، وهي دراسة مكتملة سيتم رفعها على موقع الندوة في خلال الأيام القادمة. شارك في مراجعة هذه الدراسة مجموعة مختارة من جميع الدول في المجموعة، ويمثل هذه المجموعة التي قامت بالمراجعة مجموعة مختارة هي المتحدثين الذين يشرفوننا في هذه الندوة اليوم من دول مختلفة يعرضون تجارب متعددة في اهتمامات مختلفة للمجالس البلدية. أتمنى لهذه الندوة بحضوركم ومشاركتكم النجاح الذي نأمله جميعا. أرجو أن تكون بداية لتعاون طويل في هذا المجال لا نهاية له. شكرا لكم جزيلا، وننطلق إلى اللقاء القادم. شكرا جزيلا.
نشكر الدكتور زاهر على الكلمة الترحيبية. نبدأ الآن مع الأستاذ بلال صغير، وهو باحث في مركز الإدارة المحلية، وسيقدم ورقة عن مجالس البلدية في دول مجموعة العشرين. تفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Good evening from Riyadh. Before I start my presentation, I would like to again welcome all distinguished speakers, moderators, and guests who joined us in this event. We understand some of you have joined us from very different time zones, and we really appreciate your presence with us tonight. Secondly, on behalf of the center, I would like to once again extend my sincere thanks to all scholars who volunteered their time. We truly hope that it's just the beginning and will open new doors of partnerships in the long term with the center. Tonight, we are very pleased to share this study through this forum. So just to give a brief background about this study, this municipal council study, it's the first of its kind and was developed by the Center for Local Governance to provide a useful resource for researchers and practitioners around the world, enable them to learn how municipal councils and other similar institutions functions in different parts of the world. In our study, we focused on the G20 member states in order to give a diverse landscape of municipal councils. The reason why we chose G20 is that G20 group represents every continent, accounts for about 2/3 of the global population, and includes both developed and developing countries. So that's why we made it as the main center for our study. The study is about 110 pages long, and we described the state of the municipal councils in more descriptive and qualitative way in order to benefit a wider community. We did not aim to compare the effectiveness of the councils in different countries given the variation in the local systems. Rather, we intended this study to be used as a knowledge base and to enable our readers to get familiar with similar institutions in the G20 countries. Next. So we selected 8 general indicators to structure the study and make a consistent pattern throughout the document. So this includes first the legislative basis that describes how the councils are institutionalized within the national or provincial legislation. Then the electoral or appointment system describing how the council's members are elected or appointed, what are the mechanisms. Then what's the employment status of the councils in those countries, whether they work full-time, part-time, or on a voluntary basis. Also, we discussed the mandates and authorities, including both legislative and the executive ones. Also, in our study, we gave some reflection about what are the different participatory tools that councils employ for engaging with the citizens. Also, what are the different means of local revenue generation and its size in comparison with, its size in comparison with the financial support provided by the central and provincial governments. And also in the study, we brought some highlights about how these council structures, the size of the council is determined, what is the criteria, either it's the population size or the demographic characteristics or something else. And lastly, we talked about the core structure and of the council, its composition, and how it is linked with the municipality or the administrative branch. Next. Here is a general overview of the design of each chapter. At the beginning, we have a brief summary of the local government system for each country, so that the reader gets familiar about the context before getting into particular details about the municipal councils. And we followed this pattern throughout the document. Next. Since it's a long descriptive report, I will try to limit my presentation to some selective features only, and then we will later share this study with our audience to explore more into details. Next. Here are some of the quick facts from the study that shows the range of variation when we spread the municipal councils across the G20 states. For example, the minimum tenure for the council was observed as 3 years in Mexico, and at the maximum 6 years in France. In terms of annual remuneration of the municipal councillors, we saw Japan has the highest remuneration for councillors, whereas the lowest were observed in India and Germany. The same goes with the council size, in which the smallest council was found in Italy with only 2 members, whereas the largest council size was 270 in one of the South African municipalities. And lastly, about the local revenue generation, we found out that some municipalities in Australia, in terms of their capacity for revenue generation, they generate about 90% of the total revenue of their budget. So these are just some of the quick facts about the study. Next. An important implication of this study is the institutional arrangement between the mayor and the council. In the context of G20 countries, we found mainly 3 types of these institutional arrangements. The first, in which the mayor is elected from within the city council. He forms an executive branch and work with the local administration to implement laws. The second is an executive mayor system. For example, we saw this in Italy, Japan, and Brazil, in which the mayor is elected through popular vote and enjoys greater powers and authorities over the council. And in such arrangement, the mayor is the one in charge mostly to lead the policy initiatives and setting local priorities. The third form is the council manager setup, which we observed in some cases in Australia, in India, and also in Mexico. And under this setup, the appointed professionals run the administrative affairs of the municipality, where the elected councillors, they are mostly in charge of the bigger policy picture and minimize their administrative roles. So these are 3 main kinds of arrangements we saw across the 3 G20 countries. There is no one-size-fits-all rule, and it all depends on what works best in the given context. Next, please. Also, we have seen various collaborative practices by the municipal councils, and these collaborative practices are really helpful in making the municipalities more efficient in terms of their service delivery, in terms of distributing their cost. So for example, in Australia, Europe, and UK, we saw some councils, they develop formal partnerships among each other in order to implement new projects, urban policies, and all those initiatives that have implications beyond their municipal jurisdictions. So this effective working collaboration and formal partnerships not only help councils to improve the quality of service delivery, but also benefit from lower cost of development and the economies of scale. In order to succeed in local policies and decision-making process, it is highly important to have effective and meaningful channels of citizen engagement. In our study, we found out a variety of tools that councils employ in order to engage with the community. For example, in Argentina, there is a concept of developing joint councils with citizens groups. This allows the segments of community, including young adults, people with disabilities, and elderly groups, that they work in collaboration with the council, and they use the council's platform to give their suggestions and feedback. Also, we saw some unique practices of participatory budgeting in Brazil, where the council must have the citizens' approval or the recommendation before they decide or before they allocate budget for the municipal works. In Canada, for example, we've seen councils, they broadcast their meetings online to engage people to be part of those meetings. So this is one of the participatory practices. In Germany, also there are similar practices where citizens can, for example, request a particular issue in their municipality to be raised as a discussion in one of the council meetings. They have to sign a petition, and the council will raise it as one of their meeting agendas. So these are some of the this brief highlights of some community practices being performed by councils in the G20 countries. Next, please. Next, please. So in essence, municipal councils have traditionally assumed a variety of legislative duties ranging from making laws and regulations to controlling budgets. However, in our study, we found out that municipal councils are expanding their role from traditional functions, and beside performing their mainstream duties, they are taking more innovative role, working as municipal think tanks and policy units that are fostering innovation in their municipalities. Therefore, their perception has largely been transformed from simple legislative units to municipal think tanks, and therefore there lies an equal opportunity for all G20 municipal councils in the G20 countries to learn, to share, and to inspire such practices and adopt new ways to achieve inclusive agendas for building livable and sustainable communities. Next, please. So that was just a very brief highlight of the study. We plan to release it on 21st of November, the same day as the main G20 summit. You'll be able to download the study from the symposium website under the tab of publication. It's available in both English and Arabic. So we really urge our audience to give it a read, and hopefully you will find it useful. That's all from my session. Thank you.
نشكر الأستاذ بلال على ما قدمه. الآن سنبدأ إن شاء الله الجلسة الأولى من جلسات هذه الندوة، تقدمها الدكتورة سمية سليمان. الدكتورة تشغل حاليا منصب الرئيس التنفيذي لهيئة فنون العمارة والتصميم في وزارة الثقافة. طبعا قبل ذلك كانت عميدة في كلية التصاميم بجامعة الإمام عبد الرحمن بن فيصل، وهي عضو في المجلس البلدي لأمانة المنطقة الشرقية من بين عامي 2016 إلى 2020. طبعا حاصلة على الدكتوراه في العمارة من جامعة نيوكاسل في بريطانيا، وماجستير في العمارة من جامعة الملك فيصل. حصلت على شهادات تنفيذية في الإدارة والقيادة والاستراتيجية والابتكار من معهد ماساتشوستس للتكنولوجيا. مثلت المملكة في ضمن عدة وفود رسمية متعددة، وقدمت أبحاثها في مؤتمرات دولية. طبعا تفضلي دكتورة.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session, which is entitled The Institutional Models of Municipal Governance, a Global Perspective. Today, I would like to welcome two of our speakers. On schedule, we have three speakers. Unfortunately, Dr. Kohai Suzuki had unforeseen circumstances, so he will not be joining us today. But today, we will be starting with Dr. Roberta Ryan, who is the professor and director for the Institute of Public Policy and Governance and the Center for Local Government at the University of Technology in Australia. So Professor Roberta Ryan was appointed in April 2020 to the Faculty of Business and Law as the inaugural professor of local government and academic director of the Hunter Research Foundation Center. A political sociologist, Roberta brings extensive experience in applied public policy, research and evaluation, with particular strength in working with subnational governments around Australia and internationally. Her work focuses upon strategically positioning local and regional governance as key to ongoing regional prosperity. Prior to this role, she was the inaugural director of the University of Technology Sydney Institute for Public Policy and Governance and the director of the UTS Centre for Local Government and the Australian Centre Excellence for Local Government in November 2012 to March 2020. So during this period, IPPG significantly grew the university's impact research income through engaged policy research and advisory for all levels of government across a range of policy fields, and established the Master of Applied Policy. So before asking Dr. Roberta to take the floor, I would like to also announce that we will be taking questions in writing. So for the audience, if there are any questions, please do submit them as we hold this session. I would also ask Dr. Roberta to stick to the 15 minutes, and I will be giving a notice perhaps 2 minutes before the end of the time. Please go ahead, Dr. Roberta.
Good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I hope your video is okay. How's it sounding at your end? Okay, well, we'll pop the slides up, please.
Do we have the slides?
Shall I just start?
Yeah. So please start until we pull up the slides.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very pleased to be talking to you this evening from Australia. I'm now appointed as a Professor of Local Government at the University of Newcastle, which is a couple of hours north of Sydney. The local government system in Australia is a very diverse system. Australia has 3 levels of government, and in Australia, local government is what we call a creature of state government. So there's no representation of local government in our federal system. Local government is a legislative function of state governments in Australia. So that leads us to the situation where we have 6 states and 2 mainland territories in Australia. One of those territories doesn't have a local government system, but it leads to having 7 different systems of local government across Australia. So it's always very difficult to characterise local government as one system in Australia. Local government state governments predate the national government in Australia. Australia wasn't federated into one country until 1901. So what we have here are many state governments that existed before our national government, and indeed many local governments existed before our state and federal government. So it's an old system of local government, and Australia is a very large continent, and so local government was really established by land-owning men to ensure that goods were able to be taken to markets. So it's a system in Australia that's very much focused on an infrastructure system, and sometimes local government in Australia is referred to as a system of roads, rates and rubbish. Now, of course, that's changed a great deal over time, and I'll give you a short picture and story of some of those changes. So if I could have the next slide, please. If I could also go to the next slide now, please. So there's no involvement of federal government or our national government in local government in Australia, as I mentioned, and in fact, local government is not represented in the Australian Constitution. So many local governments were established around about the 1840s in Australia in the capital cities of the state governments, and so many of those local governments have been around much longer than both state and national governments. In Australia, there's about 534 local councils across Australia, and of those councils, 60 to 70% of them are what we call rural and remote councils. Those councils are also a major employer in the non-metropolitan area in Australia. So we have about 200,000 people in Australia employed in the local government system, And of those, in those councils, for about 100 of those local government areas in Australia, the local council is either the largest or the second largest employer by number in those local government areas. Local councils in Australia are also the most significant employer of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, our First Nations people. Local governments in Australia have significant revenue and assets under management. Their main function in Australia is to provide physical infrastructure for non-metropolitan communities. However, over time, they've moved to a bigger focus on delivering social and community services. Next slide, please. And I'll seek to characterise some of those changes. I just put this map up to show you the diversity of local government in Australia. This is a map of Australia and the 534 local governments across Australia. And if we look at the East Pilbara Council in Western Australia, it has a land area that is larger than the whole of the country of Belgium, and it looks after about 1,000 people. Compared with the city of Brisbane, which is a major capital city council in Australia, which has responsibility for servicing well over 1 million residents. So local government in Australia varies vastly in terms of its legislative arrangements, in terms of its spatial context, in terms of the kinds of services and functions that it has. The next slide, please. So we have, as I said, 7 different systems of local government, 1 for each state and 1 for the Northern Territory, which is a remote region in Australia, the Australian Capital Territory, which houses Canberra, and the National Capital doesn't have a local government system. Local governments vary in size, land area, economic dominance, and the types of services offered. Local governments in Australia are generally governed by an elected council of one mayor, and councillors, and the services are delivered by staff managed by an senior executive. We do also have directly elected mayors in Australia, so we have a bit of a mixed system. The primary sources of funding for local government in Australia are what we call property taxes or taxes on land, as well as fees for services and grants from other levels of government. So Australia has a federation in which the majority of income for government comes to the federal government, the national government, and is redistributed through complex intergovernmental relations to other levels of government. The next slide, please. The changing nature of services in local government in Australia is one of its most distinctive features. So, as I said before, local governments were established in the colonial era to provide town improvement services and services to property, what we call services to property. So that is meaning waste services, water services, municipal services, roads, and so on. And principally they were services by landowners using to support Australia's agricultural base to get goods to market. However, that has changed significantly, and it's really marked by an era where we talk about pre- and post-war, Second World War services, but particularly post the Second World War in Australia, local government services have expanded significantly to what we call services to people. So now local governments in Australia provide services such as libraries, childcare, sporting fields. Particularly in regional areas, they might provide services such as aged care services. Local government in Australia has quite flexible legislation. Local governments are legislative creatures of state governments, but they do have the ability to tailor services to meet citizen needs. And it's the main rationale for local government in Australia in the modern era. So it's the idea that local government services are closest to the people and are able to be responsive to the needs of the particular locality which they serve. However, it's a complex service provision system in Australia where local government is often not the only provider of services. So if you take something like education, the national government in Australia is responsible for universities, state governments are responsible for the provision of schools, and the local governments are responsible for the provision of childcare or early childhood services. However, so is the private sector. So we operate in a very mixed mode of service provision in Australia. Next, please. So this next slide is just a picture that tries to demonstrate that services in Australia that local government provide have really had different historical periods from about the 1840s onwards to about the 1980s. There was the strong focus on property services or services that councils provide to landowners. And from about the 1980s onwards to the current time, the picture here represents the kinds of services that might be offered by different local governments, including things like sporting fields, swimming pools, and so on. The next slide, please. So local government is responsible in the jurisdictions in which they operate to promote the social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of the places in which they govern. Generally, local governments operate on a 4-year electoral cycle, although that does vary slightly from different places. But one of the features of local government in Australia is that it's a phenomenon called the rising expectations around the type and quality of local government services, so that there's continuing fiscal pressure on local governments in Australia to provide more services, better services, and often areas which have very small populations but large land masses really struggle financially to address those kinds of challenges. As you can see, Australia is a very large continent. We largely have population on the around the coast, so very many parts of Australia's interior have very few people living there. So it's a very complex service system, particularly in remote and regional areas. Next, please. And in parts of Australia, local government is the only service provider in some of the more remote parts of Australia. So in terms of the latest trends, and I'm sure that local government in Australia is similar to other G20 countries, there is an increasing divide in terms of prosperity between people who live in urban areas and people who live in regional areas. And today, the single biggest indicator of one's prosperity is driven by where people live. So in other words, we talk about the postcode or a zip code, if you use the American expression, that one of the things that drives people's access to services in Australia is their geographical location. So it's increasingly the case that metropolitan and urban areas are prosperous and regional areas struggle to provide the same level of services that citizens in metropolitan areas receive. So one of the key policy responses to the challenge of non-metropolitan service provision has been increasing trends across Australia to provide services at a cooperative or regional scale. So many local governments in Australia come together to share service provision. That happens in both metropolitan and non-metropolitan contexts. So we often talk about shared service models. This is an attempt to create greater efficiencies in service provision, but it also assists greatly in areas where there are significant need for services, but smaller populations and great distances to cover. Next slide, please. So just in closing, to talk about the kinds of challenges, there are significant regulatory and funding challenges to meet this expanded service delivery task. In Australia, physical assets are under a lot of pressure with respect to rising maintenance costs and the challenges of keeping assets at a respectable level. We're also right at the pointy end in local government in Australia in trying to deal with some of these significant global challenges such as climate change and increasing spatial poverty. Local governments are quite innovative in Australia, looking at new service delivery models which have been emerging, such as regional delivery models, to help deliver on this on the expanded tasks around trying to cope with smaller populations and large landmass. And there are a number of private providers and mixed models of service provision that have come into the local government system in Australia. The next slide, please. One of the other challenges, of course, is to develop performance reporting systems. We're quite well advanced in a number of jurisdictions in Australia, but that is certainly an uneven picture. And local governments in Australia are increasingly focused on delivering services that aim to meet citizen wellbeing as well as deal with the physical asset provision. So satisfaction surveys are one of the ways in which local governments check in with their citizens, and we use these to help define and judge the performance of local councils. It's not the only way. Of course, there are other measures around fiscal performance, etc. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, local governments form a significant service delivery function in Australia, particularly in the non-metropolitan, in other words, the rural and regional areas of Australia. Over time, local governments in Australia have increased their focus on social, economic and environmental wellbeing. That has shifted the priority of provision increasingly towards services for people as well as services to property. It's a complex regulatory and fiscal set of arrangements, and local governments sustain significant reform agendas on an ongoing basis across Australia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roberta. A very interesting and insightful way of looking at the Australian context in terms of local governance. We will be taking questions after our next speaker, who I will introduce now. I would like to also draw your attention again to the audience for any questions that you would have to scan the QR code that is on screen and write your questions so that we can ask our esteemed panelists at the end. So for our next session here, our next paper is presented by Professor Daniel Kravakuore. I hope I didn't butcher that name. He's the director for the Center of Territorial Studies at the National University of QMS. I hope that's correct too. He will be speaking on approaches to municipal finance and local fiscal systems. So Dr. Daniel is a professor of local government and director of the Center for Territorial Development, National University of QMS, Argentina. He is currently the director of the Ibero-American Network of Municipal Academic Centers since 2016. He's internationally prominent as one of Latin America's leading scholars in the area of local government and governmental decentralization. He serves on numerous editorial boards and is an advisor to many of the Latin American's national municipal associations, advisory committee member of the Latin American Federation of Cities, Municipalities and Associations. He's a visiting scholar at the universities in Chile, University of Valparaiso, Colombia, the University of Valle, Spain, Autonomous University of Madrid and University of Jaén, and United States, Florida International University. He has carried out many international projects from the UNDP, UNICEF, ILO, EU, UCLG, and various national agencies. Former editor of the Ibero-American Journal of Municipal Studies, president of the International Foundation for Local Development. I welcome to the stage now, or give over the floor to Professor Daniel.
In Argentina, there are 2,308 local governments, of which 1,170 are municipalities and a further 1,138 that do not have municipal status. This latter group includes different forms. Some have a clear separation between an executive and a council, while others have a single leadership comprising from 3-5 members or even a single person. Their names vary from one province to another. There is no municipal law for the whole country, and the design of the municipal system is the preserve of each province. The different municipal systems merge in the provincial constitutions and explained in municipal laws, which spell out the institutional design and overall operation of local government. Rather than similarities, these municipal systems have an important difference at the institutional, demographic, geographical, financial, and electoral level. When compared with the level of municipal autonomy within a range of Western European countries, Argentina is located somewhere in the middle and like that found in Spain, France, or Italy. In contrast, it displayed the highest level of municipal autonomy when compared with other Latin American countries. However, significant differences exist between provinces. While some of them display a high degree of municipal autonomy compared to that found in Europe, others occupy a middle-level position. Argentine municipalities only have two powers. The executive role is performed by a directly elected mayor, named intendente, in an election in which voting is obligatory. The legislative role is performed by a variable number of councillors, concejales, who are also elected mainly through party list according to the DONT system of proportional representation. Each province defines the size of the municipal councils. The minimum is 3 in small local governments, and the largest have 24 councillors. This number is related to the municipal population. In a single province, Corrientes, municipalities with full autonomy can choose the number of councillors, although the council budget is limited to 3% of the total. In all 23 provinces, municipal councillors are elected for a 4-year term of office, and each 12 provinces, half from the council membership is elected every 2 years. In the local governments without municipal status, there are other executive forms such as collective bodies with 3 to 5 members of unipersonal leadership. The term of office here is also for 4 years, except in the province of Santa Fe, where it is 2 years. The electoral system based on proportional distribution injures pluralism at the local level, although in some local governments the leading party may obtain an extremely high share of the vote because of clientelism and other cultural factors. The territorial nature of local politics in Argentina displays itself in the popular opposition to horizontal career advancement, whereby in many countries local government administration move from one to another municipality. On the contrary, citizens and the local media displayed a marked preference in post-selection for candidates who are classed as born and bred in the municipality itself. Mayors, councillors, and local government officials all maintain strong ties of loyalty to civil society. Non-governmental organizations, business association, trade union, and neighborhood group, as well as community organization, shop kitchens, school parents group, pensioners association, are all viewed by politicians as target for co-options as well as control in order to deactivate their capacity for applying independent pressure. Many of these organizations are weak and depend on financial support because obtaining grants from a national, provincial, or municipal source is usually essential for them to operate. Leadership in civil society organizations is frequently the stepping stone to a political career, both in ruling and opposition parties alike. For that reason, there is a natural interdependence between subnational politicians and community leaders. There is not clear distinction at the municipal level between politicians and senior administrators. The mechanisms of recruitment to both groups are based on clientelism, friendship, or familiarity, and belonging to the ruling party of the day is an aspiration of most administrators. The difference between politics and management is fuzzy, since all decisions, even the smallest one, have a potential electoral significance. The work of full-time municipal mayors is focused on two main areas. The first is to maintain political legitimacy by managing the delivery of service and fostering links with citizens and civil society. The construction of public infrastructure, paving roads, street lighting, water and such, schools, parks, and social hosting is the principal means by which local authorities obtain this legitimacy. In recent years, the increase in crime has become a growing concern, and despite not having legal competencies in the area, mayors meet with police chiefs and victims of crime and insecurity. The second main area is to engage in political networking at the provincial level. Given the scarcity of municipal revenues, the search for fiscal transfer to implement their budget is of paramount importance to mayors. They focus their attention on building a network of personal contacts with provincial level politicians to help them access the resources that they need. Hence, attending political meetings at the provincial and regional levels take up a lot of their time. Municipal councillors fulfill their roles on a party time basis only. They spend a lot of time trying to strengthen their links with community organizations as well as promoting voluntary social work activities. Councillors are remunerated but are not allowed to occupy municipal posts except for teaching posts. Councillors may be incorporated in the decision-making process when policy-making requires the approval of a new municipal norm or when it concerns us issues that has a potential electoral impact, but this is non-common. The mayor usually chooses from the list of candidates to balance the relative strength of the different factions that support him/her. At the municipal level, there is a greater capacity for direct influence by citizens, community, and organization. They need for mayors to contrast a greater degree of legitimacy in the face on the constant crisis that Vedeville, Argentine, and the general discourse in favor of citizen participation both inspire a certain degree of consultation with citizens. However, there is a high tension between the desire to increase participation as a legitimation element on the one hand and a resistance to that very participation on the other hand for fear that it may get out of control. The absence of mechanisms for citizens to introduce new policy issues that are not on the formal agenda of municipal authorities in one of the most important limitations of citizen participation in Argentina. Provincial constitutions also allow for the implementation of form of semi-direct democracy at the municipal level, such as referendum, plebiscites, and the recall of authorities, but their use is limited. The subnational government in Argentina is not typical of Latin America. This is reflected at the local government level, where municipalities display a higher level of autonomy than in other Latin American countries, and a level like European countries with a medium-high grade of autonomy. The decentralization process that Latin America underwent since the end of military rule in the 80s did not have its classic expression in Argentina. Political devolution here was not a major issue because local government had been elected since the 19th century, and by the 50s, several provincial constitutions already recognized municipal autonomy. However, it shared something with other Latin American countries. Councils play a limited role in democratic life due to the exercise of the presidentialism of mayors. I apologize, my pronunciation is not the best. Best regards.
Thank you very much, Professor Daniel. Now we have some time for questions, and I'm actually going to start with a question that we received from the audience. And to start off, I would like to ask Dr. Roberta, in terms of the role of the municipal councils in educating and creating awareness for its citizens. How do you see that role?
So could I just ask you to repeat the question for me? It's about the role of councils in Australia in creating awareness.
Yes, and also education in relation to citizens.
Yes, thank you. Councils have a variety of engagement techniques with citizens in Australia. It's mostly done through legislative processes around their strategic planning processes, where in most jurisdictions in Australia, councils are required to engage with citizens about their priorities in terms of the kinds of levels of services, the types of services, and service levels. And so that's done through their strategic planning processes, which generally happen on a 3 to 4 year cycle. So councils develop a strategic plan that reflects the engagement that councils have with their citizens, and then they develop reporting processes to report back to the community on those strategic plans.
Thank you for that. I do also have a question of my own. I'm very interested in the duration of each of the cycles of the municipal councils. And you mentioned that you have a 4-year cycle. Now, obviously, whenever there's planning that requires more time, then I'm just not sure what happens there. So I was wondering if you could perhaps touch on that. But then also, given that, whenever there's an election year, whether or not, that actually changes the activities, let's say, of the councils. Do they actually have a chance to get re-elected? And does that impact, their work perhaps closer to elections?
Thank you. That's a great question. The strategic planning processes of councils that I was referring to before is designed to try and help that challenge that we face, where the elected councils may change as they go to election on, say, it does vary between jurisdictions in Australia, but say between a 3 and a 4 year cycle. So what happens is, as part of councils' strategic planning processes, they do short-term, medium and long-term planning, and each council has a long-term financial plan, a long-term asset plan, and they report against the 3-year planning cycle as well as the 10-year planning cycle. So we call this a community plan, not a council plan. So it's a plan that the role of council is not just to deliver the services directly themselves, but to partner with other levels of government or the private sector, but particularly to enable, through the strategic planning process, the delivery of what's required in a locality over the longer term. So each council, each elected council, as it comes in on that change during the electoral cycle, will generally take forward some of the long-term priorities of the previous council.
It's very clear. Thank you for that. Maybe to follow up on that as well, we have a question here asking, is the supervisory role of the municipal council inconsistent with submitting proposals and initiatives for service projects of cities and village developments? And that also kind of relates to the strategic plan in itself, and having perhaps ad hoc or maybe participatory initiatives that come along. So how do you deal with those?
Yes. It is. Thank you. That's a great question too. There's a bit of a mixture in terms of the long-term strategic planning processes, and then focused citizen engagement that can occur around particular issues. So just this weekend, I was working with a regional council in New South Wales, in a very beautiful part of New South Wales, surrounded by rainforests, and that community is particularly interested in how they can build their community resilience. So that council, for example, is running citizens' juries or deliberative planning processes, similar to the kinds of things that we talk about sometimes in terms of participatory budgeting. So this is a very significant engagement of representative members of the community. So we spent the whole weekend together this weekend with 25 specifically selected representatives of that locality, and worked through with them a detailed plan on how they could build their resilience as a community. This is a community that has recently faced the threat of both bushfires and floods. We had a very challenging bushfire season in Australia last year, as people might recall. So a specific initiative of the local council is to work with the citizens, and I helped facilitate that, to develop ways in which that community can better respond to those kind of external challenges. So that's a pretty good example of a very specific kind of project with specific engagement around an issue that is very important to that local community.
Thank you very much for that. We do have a couple more questions. One relates to self-governing groups and the establishment of new municipal councils. Are there certain criteria that are in existence, and what are they, or how do they work? And then also in terms of the relationship between the federal government and these local councils, when it comes to accountability, reporting, and that kind of thing. So what kind of a relationship is there?
I'll start with the last question, if I might. The local governments in Australia have almost no relationship with the national or federal government, except to say that because we have what is called vertical fiscal imbalance in Australia, in other words, the money that is collected, the majority of taxation income in Australia is collected by the national government, and it is redistributed through grants systems to state and local governments. So local governments in Australia receive what's called financial assistance grants from the national government via state governments. It's a complicated federated system, via state governments to local governments. And then along with that, local governments collect their own revenue through rates, through property taxes, as well as charging for services. So in terms of the relationship between local and federal government, except through funding, there is none in a policy sense. What happens in terms of federal and state governments in relation to policy development at local government, they are governed by legislation of each state government. So each state government periodically, every 10 or so years, introduces new local government legislation which seeks to change the functions and operating arrangements of local government. So in Australia, most recently, West Australia and Victoria have new local government legislation which has changed the operating basis of local government. In terms of the formation of new local governments, that is done through the same legislative process. So what happens in Australia tends to be smaller local governments get bigger. So we had about 5,000 local governments 30 years ago, and we're now down to about 500. So local governments have got bigger. So we have a process of municipal consolidation occurring. And we have some local governments in Australia that now we have some councils that have more than 300,000 citizens, down to some councils that represent maybe a few hundred citizens. So it's there's quite a range depending on the location of the councils.
I think in general. And it's very interesting to see this across the map that you showed in terms of also the relationship of size and citizens and so on. I'm wondering about, citizen engagement. Obviously, there are definitely campaigns, participation, and so on. But particularly now, with, let's say, all the situation with COVID-19 and everything happening remotely, what kind of IT services or what kind of communication methods are you using to really make sure that you're not losing touch and really listening as much as you can, and also providing the services that are necessary?
Yes, it's Australia fortunately hasn't been as badly affected by COVID as other countries. However, we were under lockdown and had restrictions. So one of the things that is now required, particularly in New South Wales, and again it varies from state to state in Australia, each local council meeting, generally the elected council meet once a month, and then they have other meetings in between, workshops, policy discussions, strategic planning discussions, and so on. But usually they have a formal council meeting at least once a month. Those are video recorded and they're available on the websites of council. So if you wanted to go into a local government website in Australia, in New South Wales at least, you would be able to click on a web link which showed you the council meetings, the most recent council meetings. That's only been introduced legislatively into New South Wales since the beginning of this year. So you can at least observe council meetings virtually. Other forms of engagement have happened like this, where we've had meetings with citizens through, Zoom and Teams and so on, to have the kinds of conversations to help inform the policy processes. But because restrictions have just lifted in most parts of Australia now, we had that face-to-face meeting this weekend, which was the first face-to-face meeting I've been involved in since the beginning of COVID. So it's changing. But a lot of the meetings, engagement happens often through sending citizen surveys online, asking them to fill out their preferences. And sometimes it's done through telephone surveys as well. But also people are invited to public virtual forums. So there has been quite a mix of engagement strategies that have been deployed during this COVID period.
And I'm happy that you haven't been that affected to actually disrupt work, and we're still able to get to your citizens. So with that, I would like to thank you and also Professor Daniel for very insightful papers on the situation of municipal councils across different regions in the world. We are going to take a 10-minute break now. So thank you very much.
Great pleasure. Good luck with the rest of your conference. It's been a pleasure to join you. Thank you.
نرحب بكم مرة أخرى بعد الاستراحة. سنبدأ مباشرة الجلسة الثانية، ستمتد حوالي ساعة إن شاء الله، والجلسة بعنوان مناهج تمويل البلديات والأنظمة المالية العامة المحلية. سيدير الجلسة سعادة الدكتور إبراهيم البطحي، مستشار معالي مساعد وزير الشؤون البلدية والقروية. يعمل دكتور إبراهيم أيضا في العديد من الأبحاث، وترأس وشارك في عضوية العديد من اللجان وفرق العمل، إلى جانب العديد من المشاركات في برامج الزيارات الدولية وحضور المؤتمرات والمنتديات والندوات العلمية داخل وخارج المملكة. الدكتور حاصل على بكالوريوس الهندسة المعمارية وماجستير التصميم العمراني من جامعة الملك سعود، إلى جانب ماجستير التخطيط العمراني والإقليمي، ودكتوراه في الفلسفة في تخطيط المدن والأقاليم والجغرافيا من جامعة تكساس في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية.
Would first of all apologize from my, from this session speakers that I'm going to introduce actually and moderate this session in Arabic, because most of our audience are Arabic speaker. So I apologize for this. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين. الأخوة والأخوات الأعزاء، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته، وسعدتم مساء. الحقيقة في البداية أود أن أشكر مركز الإدارة المحلية بجامعة الأمير سلطان على دعوتهم لي إلى المشاركة في إدارة أحد جلسات هذه الندوة المباركة. ويسعدني الحقيقة أن أرحب بجميع الحضور في هذه الندوة عن المجالس البلدية في دول مجلس العشرين الجي 20 التي نظمها المركز بالتعاون مع وزارة الشؤون البلدية والقروية. موضوعنا في هذه الجلسة مناهج تمويل البلديات والأنظمة المالية العامة المحلية approaches in municipal finance and local fiscal systems. في هذه الجلسة لدينا 3 متحدثين: دكتورة كريستيان مارشال من الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، البروفيسور رافيكانت جوشي من دولة الهند، والدكتورة غالينا كورلينا ديسكايا من دولة روسيا الاتحادية. الحقيقة قبل ما أبدأ مع السبيكر الأول في بعض الإرشادات اللي يعني نذكرها. طبعا الجلسة راح تكون مدتها الحقيقة ساعة، راح يكون فيها 3 متحدثين، لكل متحدث 15 دقيقة، وراح نختم ب10 دقائق أو في هذا الحدود للأسئلة. الأسئلة راح تكون يعني مكتوبة كتابيا فقط كما ذكر في السيشن الأول، وهناك ترجمة فورية في يعني عدد من اللغات. متحدثنا الأول دكتور كريستيان آر مارشال، دكتورة تعمل أستاذة في كلية الشؤون العامة بجامعة كولورادو في دنفر بالولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، تركز أبحاثها على العلاقة بين التمويل العام وقضايا التنمية الدولية، كما يناقش بحثها الحالي اللي راح تعرضه لنا اليوم على عدة نقاط هامة، من أبرزها دور المعلومات في التغلب على القيود التي تعترض تطوير أنظمة الائتمان البلدية، ودور الحكومات دون الوطنية في توفير المعلومات وقيمة تلك المعلومات لبناء المرونة في النظام المالي. عنوان الموضوع اللي هو دراسة مقارنة متعددة السنوات قائمة على التجربة لكيفية وصول الحكومة البلدية في جميع أنحاء العالم إلى التمويل من أسواق رأس المال. A multi-year empirical-based comparative study of how municipal governments across the globe can access financing from capital market. Please, I would like to welcome Dr. Christian. The floor is yours, and before you start, please, I would appreciate that your adherence to the 15 minutes assigned for you. Please, the mic is yours.
Doctor, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I'm pleased to be with you today. As you upload the slides, I'll go ahead and begin. I'm going to be presenting on a research project that I've been doing with my 2 colleagues, Dr. Tima Moldagaziev and Dr. Salvador Espinosa, looking at how subnational governments, particularly city governments, can access capital market financing, most particularly debt from capital markets, such as bonded debt. And our emphasis looks at the role of information in this process. Next slide, please. The rationale for this is that cities are increasingly facing the need for long-term financing due to rapid urbanization. By 2030, 60% of the world's population should be urban, due to high demand for infrastructure such as water, transportation, electricity, and municipal waste collection, and due to decreased financing available from central governments. However, city options for financing are often constrained, primarily due to the reliance on the central government for financing and the historical arrangements there. Only a minority of cities issued debt directly from the markets. Why not? Next slide, please. This isn't a surprise because despite subnational governments having increasing responsibility of financing capital investments, they are constrained by their institutional environments, as well as their own capacity to access market. And here I identify 4 fundamentals that need to be in place for cities to access the markets. These include a way to maintain national macroeconomic stability, having a fiscal decentralization framework that allows cities to borrow from capital markets and to collect revenues for those, a legal environment that affects the rules of capital markets, as well as the municipal government's own fiscal and debt capacity. Combined, the design of these 4 sets of fundamental factors can facilitate or retard capital market growth. Pulsing through all these institutions but not explicit in the literature, is the role of information. Next slide, please. So we ask the question, how does information matter in strengthening subnational government capital markets and holding those fundamental factors constant? How does a country's ability to resolve information problems and the city's credit quality affect the city's debt portfolio? Next slide, please. Our theoretical anchor is information economics, and we take the position that given information problems in borrowing, the resolution to that is to provide more and better information. We take our position from the corporate finance literature, which shows that a borrower's debt level and composition respond to the information environment. Most particularly, transparency and disclosure and regulatory quality affect the amount of debt and the type of debt that entities hold. Thus, we pursue the hypothesis that the ability of a city to resolve information problems increases its access to capital markets and shifts its composition of debt toward more market debt. Next slide, please. The results that I present today come from a series of studies that we've been conducting over the last 5 or 6 years. The first is a national level analysis of the 52 countries in the world that allow for subnational governments to borrow, where we show that subnational debt is a function of city information resolution at the national level. Our second empirical study is of 73 cities representing 37 countries, showing that city level information resolution impacts city debt levels and debt from capital sources. In the third study, we drill down to 12 city cases and look at their credit fundamentals in more detail and to show how those credit fundamentals affect their debt structure. And then finally, we pull the first 3 sets of ideas together in a city in country comparative analysis, where we look at both the national institutions and the city governance structures to see how they impact city debt structure. Next slide, please. The results of our national analysis show that greater levels of information resolution at the national level are positively associated both with the adoption of subnational government capital markets and the volume of debt at the subnational government level. This means that the better the transparency, the disclosure, and the regulatory quality at the level of the national government is, the greater the amount of debt held by subnational governments, as illustrated in the graph on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. Moving to the city level, this map shows you the range of debt held by city governments in these countries. And you can see that it's highest in Canada, some of the European and Scandinavian countries, as well as Japan, and then decreases as the color blue becomes more light. Next slide, please. For our city level analysis, we find that the credit quality of cities, which we use as a proxy for information, is positively associated with more reliance on debt. The graph on the right-hand side shows the positive relationship between credit quality of cities and the amount of debt they hold. We also found that the debt structure depends on credit quality. Next slide, please. The graph on the left shows the positive relationship between credit quality and debt securities, the share of debt that comes from bonded instruments. The graphic on the right shows the distribution of how those 73 cities use debt securities. The bar on the left shows you that the majority of cities use no debt from the securities market. Most cities do not rely on debt from bonded markets, from capital markets. On the right-hand side, that the bar at 100% shows you the amount of cities that rely only on debt securities. Most cities, however, are in the middle and use some share of capital and non-capital financing arrangements. Next slide, please. As we drill down to the 12 city cases, we can find that city credit quality depends most specifically on good budget practices and having a strong economic foundation. City use of capital market debt depends not only on the underlying economy, but also on their fiscal management and governance practices, as well as on strategies for long-term development and planning. So it's not enough to have debt, but you need to use your debt for a strategic purpose. And in the graph on the right, you can see the positive relationship between budget practices and fiscal management against credit quality. Next slide, please. Thus, with credit quality being such an important factor, what we recommend for a policy quadrant is that the decision to move into debt at subnational levels should depend on the quality of the credit environment. And if you follow the red arrows, we recommend increasing city credit quality in advance of increasing subnational debt levels. Next slide, please. Now what I'm going to do is pull together the information from the national information, which is on the left-hand side, against city credit quality on the bottom of your figure. In this, we represent a quadrant where you can decide which financing options are best suited depending on your information environment. In the bottom left corner, where credit quality is low and national resolution of information is also low, capital financing may not be a reasonable alternative. In the upper right-hand corner, where capital financing is the most reasonable alternative, this happens when credit quality is high and national information systems are also strong. But many country situations and many city situations fall on the opposite diagonal. In the upper right-hand box, credit quality is low, but the systems at the national level are strong. In the bottom right-hand box, city credit quality is high, but national information systems are weak. Next slide, please. Looking at the 3 city comparative cases, the red dots show where the cities might be operating if they were at their maximum potential. You can see that Monterrey, which is the top box, represents a country of Mexico, which of these 3 samples has the strongest information environment, followed by Seoul, Korea, and then finally Sofia, Bulgaria. You can also see that Seoul, Korea, being furthest to the right, has the highest credit quality, followed by Monterrey, and then by Sofia. What this matrix shows us, though, is that these 3 cities are not leveraging their full financing opportunities, and there might be some inefficiencies in capital financing. For example, they're all operating in the upper left-hand quadrant. They're all operating as if the external environment were strong and as if their credit quality were low. There are 2 lost opportunities here. One is that the cities that have better credit quality might be served better to borrow from capital markets, moving from the blue boxes over to the right into the red boxes. And also, for the case of Sophia, the credit enhancement in the upper left-hand quadrant is needs to compensate for the information environment, but instead it's compensating for the city's credit quality. Next slide, please. So that helps us understand better
Doctor,
a
there's 2
recommendation
minutes remaining,
for the
please.
type of enhancements that need to occur according to the type of information that's missing. When city credit quality is low, the information enhancement needs to enhance credit quality, as in the upper right-hand quadrant. And when the information at the national level is low, there needs to be enhancements to support that weakness, as in the bottom right hand. So with that, I'll move to the final slide and say thank you very much for your attention. And if you find this interesting, I hope that you'll look out for our forthcoming book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We move to the second speaker, Professor رافيكانت جوشي. الدكتور رافيكانت جوشي يعمل مستشار الممارسات الحضرية لشركة كريسل ريسك اند انفراستراكشر سولوشنز مومباي دولة الهند، وهو متخصص في الإدارة والتمويل الحضري، وعمل في داخل الهند وخارجها، وهو رئيس سابق للحسابات في شركة فادورا البلدية بخبرة تزيد عن 35 عام. كما عمل مستشارا لفترة قصيرة في العديد من الجهات مثل البنك الدولي، برنامج المياه والصرف الصحي، بنك التنمية الدولية، موئل الأمم المتحدة، ومنتدى الكومنولث للحكومات المحلية، والعديد من المنظمات على المستوى الوطني الحكومي بشأن القضايا الحضرية. كما وضع فكرة وتصميم وتنفيذ نظام محاسبة الدخول المزدوج القائم على أسس المستحقات في 159 هيئة بلدية في ولاية وجارة. عنوان موضوع ورقة البروفيسور: الاتجاهات المالية للبلديات في الهند Trends in Municipal Finances in India. Please welcome Professor. The mic is yours, and please, I would like you to adhere to the 15 minutes allowed to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. And also I welcome all the virtual participants of this symposium. May I ask my presentation first slide? So I'm going to speak about the trends in municipal finance in India. Of course, I will also relate my talk with the earlier speaker who has spoken about accessing capital market. Very interesting and very valuable research they are doing. And also I will relate it to the first session Australian speaker telling about the Australian local body system. Next slide, please. So India is one of the biggest urban system in the world. In fact, we have more than 330 million people in 2011, 377 million in 2011, and our urban system just in 2021, when the new census will be coming out, will be around 460 million people in urban areas. And then by 2030, India is expected to have more than 543 or 550 million people staying in the urban areas. In fact, some estimates are that there may be 600 million people will be in the urban areas. India has 35 states, and like Australia, India is highly diverse and federal state. So Indian urbanization is, of course, very varied. We have more than 7,500 urban areas as per 2011 census, and more than 4,500 cities at the moment. There are 500 cities which are more than 100,000 population. And then there are 130 cities which are more than 500,000 population, 55 cities with more than 1 million population. And there are 3 cities or urban agglomerations which are close to 20 million. So Indian urbanization is highly varied. Also, India is geographically varied, and development-wise also different states have different economic background and all that. So in all, if you want to see every type of urban local government, then come to the India and you will find such a variety for the research. Also, as Australian speaker said, our local governments is a British model and it predates the national government. And even it predates the state governments. Till 1920, it was the local government which was the main bedrock of our political system. So in all, local governments, and then as we have federal structure, again, our local governments like Australian system are state creatures. They don't have direct powers from the constitution, but yes, the 74 Constitution Amendment, which was brought out in 1993-94, ensures its existence, and it states that each and every local area must have democratically elected local government. There are 6 states which are close to the 50% population, and by 2021, they will cross 50% population. Also, Indian urbanization is skewed one. Some places we have very high urbanization, and some places it's less than even 20%. In fact, 6 states constitute more than 50% of the urban population. Next slide. So like Australian system, we also have in each state a different municipal act. As I said, we have 35 states and union territories. So we have different act in each states. And as urban local bodies predates even state governments and the central governments, there are customs and cultures and then precedents at the local body level. Now coming to the financial trends, in last 20 years, India has maintained almost 1% share for urban in its GDP. Now some people may feel that even the developing countries like South Africa, Brazil, they are spending much more than India on urban. And India has such a big urban system, and still it is spending 1% of the GDP. But you have to take into account size of Indian GDP also. So it has maintained its share of urban finance at 1% of GDP. But if you see it in absolute terms, the amount is so much, because in last 15-20 years, as you know, India has having high GDP growth rate. So when it comes to the amount, then in 2002, somewhere only 209 billion rupees was the size of the municipal universe. But come to the 2018, and now municipal finance size is 1.7 trillion rupees. So municipal own source revenue, which at the moment constitute 40% of their revenue, it's not like very high in other countries, as your study has pointed out. India is moderately 40%, and in last 20 years, that percentage has come down from 55 to 40%. That is because government of India and the various state governments realize the importance of the urban infrastructure, and therefore they opened up the purse and have devolved much more resources. That is apparent from this slide. You can see that municipal own source revenue moved from 132 billion to 733 billion in last 20 years. But if you look at the state government, then it has moved from 59 billion to 555 billion. That is the 9-time increase in the transfers. We also have, like Australian system, a huge vertical transfer, intergovernmental fiscal transfers, because maximum share of the resources or taxes goes to the central government and the state government. So local governments get grant from the national government also and the state government. And if you look at the government of India's devolution, it was just 5.85 billion or 6 billion around 2002, and it's now 206 billion. So it has increased 35 times in this time. And there are other resources also at a municipal level, which have also increased from 11 billion to 222 billion. So in all, though the municipal universe size has remained at 1% of the GDP, which is much lower compared to the international comparison, but in absolute terms, there has been a huge increase in the resources available for the municipal bodies and to the urban system. Next slide, please. This graph shows the next aspect of it, that how much India is spending on urban investment. As I said, 1% of the GDP is total, but you can see that we are spending almost 7.6% or 0.7% of the GDP in recent year, that is 2011 onward, on the infrastructure investment, that is developing the metros, developing the PRTS, developing the basic services like water, sewerage, and all that, solid waste. And you can see that from 430 billion in 2011, that size or the investment in urban infrastructure has moved to the 1.2 trillion in 2017-18. Out of this 1.2 trillion, basic services constitute also a large share, or to give you in a reference to the GDP, it is 4%, 0.4% of the GDP on the basic services, and together metro and housing, it is 0.7% of the GDP. Also, you can see a drastic change in a municipal finance trend, that now almost 85% of the capex, that is the urban investment, is getting funded by the government of India devolutions and the state government, respective state government devolution. In per capita terms, also, you can see a quantum jump at the 13% CAGR from 1,182 rupees per capita per annum to almost it has doubled, 2,771 rupees per capita. Municipal share in the capex is almost 45%. Rest of the urban local institutions, there are other parastatals, state level and city level parastatals. They also carry out the investment in urban areas. It is not only the urban local bodies. Next slide, please. So if we look at the future, now what are the municipal finance trends which are contemplated by various committees and the study reports and research reports commissioned either by the government of India or which are done by the academics. Here we are saying that we need to go by 2025, that is in next 5 years, the spending on the urban investment ideally should double to 2% of the GDP. So from 1% to the 2% of the GDP, it should move. That is what is recommended. And Government of India and other state governments are working on that. The sectoral share, if we look, then the municipal own source revenue should go, which constitute at the moment 0.32% of the GDP, to or 4% of the GDP to 8% of the GDP. Municipal own source revenue should go. Then GOI, that is Government of India, at the moment is giving 0.3% of the GDP. Should go to the 0.3% of the GDP from existing 0.1% of the GDP, and state governments will go from 0.3% at the moment to the 0.7% of the GDP. So that is the breakup where it is intended to go, and by 2030 we should go to the 2.5% of the GDP. India would require more than 70 trillion rupees in coming years in urban investment. And the strategy for resource mobilization is, of course, property tax, which is with the urban local bodies. Then user charges for water supplies, solid waste, and the sewage. Next, we are banking, or the government has also introduced a policy regarding the value capture financing in tune with the existing trend to use the real estate market or the market operations. So various land-based fiscal tools like incremental financing, tax incremental financing, or using the FAR or floor space index, premium FSI, transferable developmental rights, development charge, impact fees. So all these different mediums, or these are the tools which are being advocated aggressively. Of course, public-private partnership is what we are looking, and a lot of regulatory changes, and they have been carried out. Public-private partnership has great success, very notable examples at the national level in economic infrastructure, whether constructing the airports, seaports, national highways, and many other big infrastructure. But at urban infrastructure level, its entry is limited. So there are special efforts at the government. So next municipal trend would be more and more going for the market-based instruments, and then leveraging the funds to the municipal bonds and the market instrument. Here I would like to refer to my earlier speaker. In India, there is a paradox. Though credit rating is high or credit quality is high, in case of some 30-40 cities which are big and with good credit rating, unfortunately, those cities haven't gone the way they should have gone for the leveraging from the market. Then the issue is a lot of municipal bodies which are in a B, that is not so good investment grade. So the next step could be in municipal finance trend is to give them hand-holding support, credit enhancement, and you rightly said that we would require information sharing and all such things. But at the national level, regulatory changes has taken place very recently in 2017. Also, Government of India has given incentive now. In last 30 years, our first municipal bond happened in 1997, and we have raised more than 300 billion from the markets. And let me tell you, there is not any mishap, or not a single municipal bond has gone into non-payment on anything. So whatever, almost 33 issues have happened in last 25 years, 26 years. As I said, raising 300 billion rupees, Indian rupees. And all municipal bodies who have raised have absolutely a good track record.
Excuse me, Professor.
Municipal bond system has got stabilized in India.
We have 2 minutes, please.
Yes. So it has got stabilized, and we need to overcome the paradox wherein though credit quality is good, cities are not leveraging, and then other cities need to do step up their credit quality and also take the help of the information system. So these are the trends. Yes, in trends, you can feel that municipal bodies have lost their share in the municipal universe. But if you look in the 21st century, the classical philosophy of local self-government, independent, is changing, and it's not valid. In a sense, in this 21st century, we are going for some kind of a networking and centralizing tendencies in public finance. And India also, you can see that in last 20 years, the share of government devolution has increased, and more interest is taken, and more things are looked at the national and central level and the state level. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, and I would love to have the questions on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for sticking to the time. And our third speaker is Dr. غالينا كورلينادسكايا. دكتور غالينا تعمل مدير عام مركز السياسات المالية بدولة روسيا الاتحادية، وهي واحدة من أكثر الخبراء الروس تميزا في مجال الحكومات دون المستوى الوطني، وبالأخص في قضايا الميزانية المحلية والعلاقات المالية الحكومية الدولية مع المستوى الأعلى للحكومة. وهي عضو مجلس الخبراء مع حكومة روسيا والمجلس العام للحكومة المحلية والعلاقات الحكومية الدولية مع البرلمان الروسي. الدكتورة غالينا حاصلة على درجة دكتوراه في الاقتصاد من معهد الاقتصاد العالمي والعلاقات الدولية في الأكاديمية الروسية للعلوم. عنوان الموضوع اللي ستتحدث عنه اليوم: صلاحيات المجالس البلدية فيما يتعلق بالمسائل المالية، حالة دراسية للاتحاد الروسي. Municipal Council Powers or for physical issues, the case of Russian Federation. Welcome, Dr. Galina, and the mic is yours. And please, would appreciate if you stick to the 15 minutes. Thank you. Dr. D.
First of all, I'm very honored to participate in this symposium tonight. It's nice that the Kingdom and Russian Federation have Moscow has the same time zone. So here in Moscow is also something past 8 p.m. like in Saudi Arabia. And so I greet everybody who is listening to this symposium and to my presentation particularly. I decided to devote my small presentation to the major topic of the research that was undertaken by the Center for Local Governance, and just to expand the information which was presented there already, information on municipal councils in Russia, mostly from the point of view of their fiscal powers, because I consider that the fiscal powers are the major powers of the municipal bodies, because without the money, the municipality cannot move forward in development, cannot invest, cannot take care of the vulnerable groups of people, so can do nothing. So please, next slide, please. First of all, I want to give you the broad picture of how the Russian public government is built. So we have the federal government, then 85 constituent units. Those are regions or provinces, plus 3 federal cities. And then there is the level of local self-government bodies or municipalities, which are have double level, 2 layers. The first layer is cities and urban districts and rural districts, which in turn are divided into intercity municipalities, and rural districts are divided into townships and rural settlements. If you want to compare, it's impossible to compare them. They're so different. They're different in size. There is, and of course, the rural settlements and townships are very small, and this is the biggest number of municipalities which are settlements, townships and rural settlements, and they all belong to rural districts. And the numbers are different so much. The number of population size are differ very much because of the different areas of the country. And the next slide, please. You will see. Next slide, please. The next slide. Yes. Like Roberta Ryan, I also decided to show you how the municipalities are allocated across a huge territory of Russian Federation. Red dots represent municipalities with a size of more than 1,000 citizens. And as you saw on the previous slide, there are a lot of municipalities which are much, much smaller. And there are some pictures of different Russian municipalities. They're also very different in history, in climatic zone, in climatic features, and so and you see that they are mostly the population is concentrated in the European part of Russia and in the Asian part of Russia or Siberia. The density of population is very small, and the blue lines show the borders of provinces, and you see how huge are the provinces or regions in Siberia and how little people live there, actually. Next slide, please. So there are three alternatives for municipal councils to be formed. Municipalities with less than 100 inhabitants, they do not create any councils at all, and decisions are taken by citizens direct voting. And municipalities below 300 inhabitants can also use the same format. Then cities and city districts or city agglomerations, but they're small agglomerations, townships and rural settlements elect deputies to the council on the basis of direct suffrage. And rural districts, which are in turn divided into townships and rural settlements, may choose between direct suffrage of deputies or create their councils out of mayors or delegates from townships and rural settlements councils. And here is the picture of one of a particular Mala Yaroslavets rural districts, which is not far from Moscow. And here I showed you their coat of arms with a bear, which is very typical for Russia. And this is how they discuss some of the municipal problems. Next slide, please. Next slide. So what are the fiscal powers of municipal councils? There are 8 of them. First of all, setting rates of local taxes, then providing, I will tell in more detail about each of the power later, but now I just list them, providing tax exemptions on local taxes, setting user charges and tariffs for services provided by municipal companies, approving municipal borrowing, approving municipal spending programs, delegating spending responsibilities to lower or upper level of municipality, deciding on intra-district fiscal equalization transfers, and finally adopting municipal budget. And here are the 2 charts which show the role of municipalities in public revenues of the whole of Russia. It's only 4%, and in expenditure, so after receiving the transfers, the expenditures are become 12%. Just recently, municipalities enjoyed much larger powers in spending, but recently spending powers or spending on preschool education, on general education, and on healthcare have been centralized to the level of provinces, and relatively their revenues were contracted just because you will see that their own revenues, own taxes constitute only a very small share of their budgets. So now municipalities do not play that big role as previously in public spending and public finance. So local taxes. There are 3 municipal taxes established by the National Tax Code: land tax, tax on property of individuals, and retail trade commission fee. It's not exactly the tax, but anyway, it's on the decision of the municipality to introduce it and to set the rate. The limits on the rates of these taxes are set again by the National Tax Code. And municipalities, but besides local taxes, which constitute only 3% in total municipal revenues on average across Russia, they constitute only 3%. And then they also retain shares of federal taxes and regional taxes, which constitute about 30% of total revenues. And the larger share of their revenue are grants or fiscal transfers from the regions, from the regional budgets or provincial budgets. Local councils, municipal councils, have any fiscal powers on regarding shared taxes and on grants, of course. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. Then municipal council may issue a decision on tax exemptions regarding only local taxes, which you remember are only 3% of total revenue. Tax exemptions cannot be provided to particular taxpayer or particular person, but only to selected categories of taxpayers. And these exemptions usually play the role of financial support to relevant categories of citizens and organizations. Usually they are provided to elderly and low-income people, to distinguished citizens, to socially oriented non-governmental organizations. The total volume of tax exemptions may constitute a tangible share of local taxes potential, but eventually they constitute only about 1 or 2% of total revenues. So this is not a big tax expenditure, tax loss. And just the pictures of elderly and distinguished people who enjoy these tax exemptions. Next slide, please. Next power is setting user charges and tariffs. In most of municipalities, mostly in urban municipalities, utility services are being provided centrally. Those are water supply, electricity supply, heating, garbage collection. And these functions are carried out usually by municipally owned enterprises. User charges and tariffs are quite often set below costs of the enterprise, and they represent quasi-fiscal risks. And that is why these enterprises are being subsidized from municipal budgets. And in case the tariffs are set at market prices, municipalities allocate earmarked subsidies to low-income families directly. Next slide, please. Speaking of municipal borrowing, those are securities, regional loans from the
Doctor, we have only 2 minutes, please.
Okay, there's bank loans and guarantees. And tax budget code, the national budget code, sets limits on the deficit, on debt, on municipal deficit, municipal debt, and debt service costs. And debt repayment together with debt service, also there are some limits on these amounts. Next slide, please. Delegating spending responsibilities. Municipal councils have the power to take a decision on delegating some of municipal spending responsibilities to lower or to upper municipal level. There are bottom-up delegating some functions which are more costly efficient on the upper level of government, or delegating from top to down, like primary fire protection, street lighting, cemeteries, and so on. The budget code prescribes that delegating of responsibilities has to be followed by transferring adequate resources from the relevant municipal budget. Next slide, please. Rural district municipalities can take a decision to equalize per capita revenue of intra-district municipalities, because here are the pictures of different municipalities which are better off and poorer ones. So by this, they provide a more or less similar level of municipal services across all intra-district municipalities. And next, please.
The time is up, Doctor. So if you close up.
The last one. This is the last slide. And just the final step is approving the municipal budget. And the municipal council carries out the budget hearings and there is only one prescriptions to submit the budget to the municipal council by November 15, which was yesterday. And here is the picture which depicts one of the North Siberia municipalities. And this is exactly how it looks like on November 15th. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I would like to thank actually all the three speakers in this session. Dr. Christine Martel, Professor Rafikant Jushi, and Dr. Alina Korolian-Deskaya for the good presentations. Just to cap up and summarize maybe the major points of each. Dr. Christina, she pointed out about the main challenges of long-term financing of cities. And also she spoke about the 4 fundamental factors of cities to access the capital market. She then spoke about how information matters actually in strengthening the cities and how cities resolve information problems. She also showed the analysis that shows level of cities debt and the debt structure and how that is important to cities. She also talked about the credit quality and its importance in city debts. Also, she showed the relationship between the information resolution and the institutions with underlying the debt. We have actually Professor Rafikant also talked about the urban capex trend in recent years and the huge expenditure and investment in the urban infrastructure in India. And then we had Dr. Alina. She spoke about the allocation of local self-government unit across Russian Republic. And she talked about the 3 alternatives for municipal councils and how important and effective each of these alternatives. Then she spoke about the 8 fiscal powers of the municipal council. Then setting user charges and tariff. Finally, she showed how to approve municipal spending programs and how these programs work. Thank you very much for our speakers for this session. And now we actually move to the questions. We have about 5 minutes for the questions. I will start actually with my question to Professor Rafikant and say that what is the role of municipal council in managing municipal finance in India? Do they have a big role in that?
Yes, because municipal bodies have financial powers, and classically they also have the certain taxes. So, in fact, some 20 years back, most of the municipal bodies were managing their operating account 100%. I was a chief finance officer of one of the million-plus city, and we were not dependent anyway on the central government or state government. But recent trends, government of India and state governments are now giving more money to the local bodies, looking to the urban infrastructure importance in national development. But municipal bodies have a big role, and even today they constitute almost 50% the revenue from their own sources.
The question here from the audience is there anything to encourage G20 countries to have municipal councils and how to help to develop them? This question is open to any of the 3 panelists. If anyone wants to answer the question, please. So
I think Christina can go. I have already answered one question.
Did you hear my question?
My understanding of the question is, what is the incentive to encourage G20 countries to have municipal councils?
Exactly, yes.
I can answer that. The theoretical rationale is that municipal governments are closer to the people, and so they better understand the needs of the people. And as many of the panelists have shown this morning, there's such diversity in the sizes and styles and necessities of the different types of jurisdictions that a higher level government may miss some of the opportunities to serve their citizens by not having governance at the local level. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one final question. How do you measure the effectiveness and performance of city councils from international experience?
There are different indices now getting developed. One sustainable index is there, then your governance index is there, financial indicators are livable city. So almost 8-10 types of the different international indices are there, which are ranking cities across the world. And that is creating a competition, also creating an incentive for the local bodies.
Can I add? Yes, from the Russian experience, municipalities report on their performance to the regions, and the regions evaluate how well they perform. And there are some competitions between municipalities of the same province and competition across Russia. They provide their programs to be evaluated by experts and expert committee. I am a member of this committee, so we judge how they perform, what are their accomplishments, and they're being awarded with some grants. First of all, fiscal grants, and then of course the honor which goes to this municipality. This is a very important process here in Russia.
Okay.
I might add that the question is very important, because one of the directions I think municipalities need to go is be able to understand their performance and to evaluate it against the performance of other jurisdictions. And there are indices, although I think they could stand for some further development. To some extent, the credit rating agencies also get at performance in their evaluation of credit quality, as they're increasingly looking not only at the fiscal components, but also at the governance components as well, and the performance components. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, you know, the topics, your topics are very important, and I have actually many questions here, but because of the time, I would say Dr. Christine, Professor Ravikant, Dr. Galina, thank you very much for your participation and for your full and good insights, and I'm sure that the audience have benefited a lot from what you have presented tonight, and thank you very much. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
اوكي، نشكر الدكتور ابراهيم البطحي على ادارته للجلسه الثانيه، وننتقل مباشره الى الجلسه الثالثه بعنوان تحقيق التوازن في العلاقه بين السلطه التنفيذيه والسلطه التشريعيه، التحديات والمضي قدما. سيدير هذه الجلسة الدكتور هاني أبو الراس، معالي الدكتور هاني أبو الراس. أستاذ بقسم الهندسة الصناعية بجامعة الملك عبد العزيز. تولى منصب أمين محافظة جدة لفترتين متتاليتين ما بين سنة 2010 إلى 2018، وخلال تلك الفترة تم إدراج مدينة جدة التاريخية ضمن قائمة اليونسكو. أيضا بادر وأكمل العديد من مشاريع التنمية الكبرى للتوسع المستقبلي في مدينة جدة. كان ضمن قائمة لأفضل 25 من أمناء المدن على مستوى العالم. حاليا يشغل منصب أستاذ في قسم الهندسة الصناعية في جامعة الملك عبد العزيز كما أسلفت. حاصل على دكتوراه في نمذجة المحاكاة والتحليل من جامعة سنترال فلوريدا في أمريكا، وحصل على درجتي الماجستير والدكتوراه من جامعة سنترال فلوريدا. ونرحب بالدكتور هاني.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. On behalf of the organizing committee, I welcome all of you to the third session of the virtual symposium on the municipal councils in the G20 countries. It's my pleasure to be the moderator for this session entitled Achieving Balance in Executive Legislative Relationship, Challenges and Way Forward. I'm trying to moderate what I hope will be stimulating discussion with a very, very eminent panel. What we are trying to do here is to understand how to control and limit the interference between the political arm, i.e. municipal councils, and the administrative arm of a local government. So before we actually get to the panel, I thought to take 3 to 4 minutes to try to set the stage for why it's important to regulate the political and the administrative interface for better and sustainable municipal services. Today, the world has increasingly come to realize that the highly effective models of governance must be characterized by meaningful inclusion of citizens in local decision-making processes and across all types of government structures. Municipal councils comprise a fundamental component of local governance. They are at the forefront of dealing with community challenges and seeking local opinions in the development process. Furthermore, they are responsible for policymaking, setting municipal priorities, and providing a legislative base for a broad range of functions. Although municipal councils are equally important institutions in all socio-political systems, they vary in their forms when seen in cross-border context. As Saudi Arabia is hosting the G20 summit in a few days, with an inspiring atmosphere for world leaders and various institutions to come across, it brings out a significant opportunity to set the stage for municipal councils as well. This session would be an excellent opportunity for those who are seeking to understand better and learn diverse international models, experiences, and innovative methods in municipal councils. Now, before we start the panel, I'm thrilled and delighted to introduce our panelists who have agreed to come online with us this evening. So I will very shortly introduce the panel in greater depth so you can understand the credentials they bring to this session. So to begin with, and from the Sunshine State, we have Dr. Alan Rosenbaum. Alan Rosenbaum is a professor of public administration and director of the Institute for the Public Management and Community Service and the Center for Democracy and Good Governance at Florida International University in Miami. Dr. Rosenbaum is currently the national president-elect of the 8,000-member American Society for Public Administration. He will assume the presidency early 2021. He is the third person to ever be elected to a second term as president in the 81-year history of the association. He has worked in senior level positions in the US government and various governments around the world. He has also carried out many projects for several leading international development organizations. Professor Rosenbaum is the recipient of numerous awards from prestigious international organizations and from the southernmost tip of the African continent, South Africa. We have this evening Dr. Andrew Siddle. Andrew Siddle holds a PhD and several other qualifications. He is an adjunct associate professor at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, where he teaches public structures and governance. Dr. Siddle focuses on local government in South Africa. He has conducted extensive field research projects on local governance across the country. As a consultant, he has worked for several South African departments, research institutes, foreign governments, and organizations. He has worked and advised more than 120 municipalities across South Africa. Dr. Siddle has authored and co-authored several publications in local government. Last but not least, from the host country of the G20 Summit, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Dr. Mohammed Al-Ghubairi is joining us this evening. Dr. Al-Ghubairi has an advanced and extensive experience in the field of developing, analyzing, and applying information systems. Part of his interest involves developing the strategy of information technology in enterprises and managing the information systems in both governmental and private organizations. He also has an interest in software engineering procedures and theories, especially those related to developing and improving the software implementation process. Dr. Al-Ghubairi has a special interest in decision support systems and electronic transactions in general. So, with these introductions, I'm going to turn to the actual meat of this event. The structure of this session is as follows. Each participant will be given 15 minutes to share his thoughts and views. And then I hope we leave the last 10 minutes for audience questions. Questions can only be submitted through a QR code, which will be sent to all of you before the Q&A session. Let me start with Dr. Al-Ghubairi, who will shed some light on the evolving context and organization of the Saudi Municipal Councils. Dr. Mohammed Al-Ghubairi, the floor is yours.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Do you hear me, Dr. Hani? Bismillah, alhamdulillah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. First of all, I'd like to thank His Excellency Dr. Hani Aburas for moderating this session, as well as my thanks extend to the members of the panel for joining us on this session. And I hope that we will be able to give some lights about the Saudi councils in Saudi Arabia. My talk is going to be, of course, about the municipal councils in Saudi Arabia and their importance and roles, and some initiatives and actions have been achieving by these councils Also, I will try to concentrate on some aspects they have been involving and all over the years they have been in practice. I will conclude with some explanations about the challenges and issues facing the councils and their work in exchange with the municipalities in Saudi Arabia. The municipal councils in Saudi Arabia, in fact, could be the same of any municipal councils in any country in the world, and in general term. However, this differs actually from country to country according to different setting, local systems, and so on. So the main actually focus and the main reason and driven reason behind the establishment of Saudi councils from the right beginning for the government is to have a real representation for the local communities, for citizens, for beneficiaries in their affairs with the municipalities who are dealing with the most important affairs relating to the local community. Next, please. The institutional framework of municipal councils in Saudi Arabia comes actually from the importance of the municipal councils. And as I said, the most important actually functionality or responsibility for the Saudi councils or municipal councils is to involve citizens in managing or in their suggestions, their concerns with the municipalities. So the importance of the municipal councils comes from the fact that they have to reflect the messages or to convey the messages from the citizen to the executive bodies and the municipalities, sharing the local development, representing the needs of the citizens with the municipalities, and supporting the role of supervision of the municipalities over different activities, projects, plans, and so on. So there are a lot of roles actually for the municipal councils here in Saudi Arabia. We have a long list actually of these roles and activities. However, I'll try to concentrate on the most important one. One of them is the approval of executive plans for municipal services projects and programs, and the prioritizing the projects and services, and to have some control over municipal performance and services which contribute to improving the efficiency and quality of municipal work, and also to the contribution to the development of municipal resources and investments, connect with the beneficiaries or the local community to convey their messages to the municipalities, also make possible they contribute to the modernization of municipal regulations and rules, study and make opinions on structural, organizational, and housing scheme and different issues related to the municipal work. Next, please. Institutional framework of the municipal councils. Perhaps our experience here is not that long as many similar councils around the world. However, they started in 2000 2006 as the first term. But however, looking at the output of these councils, although they have short time in comparison to similar councils around the world, but I can feel really very proud of their outcomes and their contributions so far. The first cycle of these councils started in 2006 with 179 councils, which included about 1,212 members, half of whom were elected, 606, and the other half appointed. And the minimum number of members of the municipal councils was 4 members, and the highest was 14. Development of these goes on. Actually, in 2011, the second cycle or second round or second term started, which also increasing the councils, the number of councils, from 179 to 285, and also increasing the members. The same thing actually happened in the third term, which started in 2015, which is currently going on. And also in this third term, actually, the councils increased also. And the proportion of elected municipal councils was raised to 2/3 instead of half, and included women's participation as voters and candidates as well. The voters' age was reduced to 18 instead of 21, and the total member of the councillors increased to 3,165. The upper limit was raised by 30 members, and the lower limit was 9 members. Next, please. The structure of municipal councils, it's in fact a legal identity with financial and administrative autonomy. For years they can spend in the office, and then a new election has to take place, reporting directly, in fact, to the Minister of the Ministry of Municipalities and Rural Affairs. Next, please. Most of the initiatives actually and work has been done by the municipal councils, actually related to issues raised by local community. And also the government of Saudi Arabia actually is trying to improve from time to time the regulations and legislations of the councils to really participate in developing life in cities and rural areas for communities. The most areas the councils have been concentrating on, although there are a lot of actually more than these, but these are the most important ones. And it may be very difficult for me to go in all details here, but I will try just to shed some lights on the main ones. Mainly investment and spending efficiency has been all over the few years very hot area in the country in general, and being taken seriously by councils to discuss and supervise on municipalities. Another area of concerns by the councils was the urban scene and law, which is also has been a very important issue discussed by the councils and municipalities to restore the look of the cities and distortion be resolved, to have prosperity for cities and to make them more attractive. Has been a lot of initiatives in this direction. The community participation, of course, this has been the most important issue for councils to make sure that the message of citizen delivered to the executive bodies. Next, please.
Dr. Muhammad, 2 minutes left, please. 2 minutes left, okay?
Okay. The other issues relating to the initiatives of councils, bridging the gap between legislation and implementation, also concentrating on services for disabled people, and also services and infrastructure being set in the cities. They have been trying to involve in all these issues and to make them to resolve any problems relating to this and suggest any solution. Next, please. The last one, please, huh? The last slide, please. The challenges facing the city councils or the municipalities councils in Saudi. There have been some issues actually, could be some challenges for them, which is the effective integration of the reporting and oversight authority of the councils with the executive roles of the mayors and other municipalities authorities. Also mutual understanding of both monitoring role of the councils and the executive roles of mayors and the municipalities officials. Another issue could be the effective participation of members themselves and their commitment to the duties being assigned to them, as well as the to improve performance efficiency of the council's members in the exercise of functions entrusted to the councils. These could be the most important issues facing them, although improvement of the councils, improvement of the legislations, improvement of the quality of members, issues like this still need to be improved. And I will try to conclude with this and extend my thanks again to the moderator and all who has been working on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Muhammad, for your informative presentation. Indeed, to enhance the quality of life for all and meet the citizens' needs and requirements, local government should continue to ensure high-quality services are provided. Therefore, both municipal councils and municipalities, in my own opinion, should continue working hand in hand in the most efficient and effective way. And this can only happen if they mutually understand each other's roles and effectively integrate their authorities and functions. Ladies and gentlemen, in a doctoral thesis in public management published in 2017 at CUT University in South Africa, the author wrote, quote, "The study resolved that poor interaction between the political and administrative institutions directly and indirectly influences the quality of service provision at municipalities, which in many cases lead to service delivery protests. A lack of political and administrative interaction, furthermore, leads to bad governance." Unquote. Now, Dr. Sedel will share with us his thoughts on how to manage the political and administrative institutions interface in municipal service provision in South Africa. Dr. Sadal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Hani, and thank you for the introduction. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to address you on a subject which is of great interest to me and which I hope will be of interest to the audience as well. So I'll be talking to you about managing the municipal political administrative interface in South Africa. Next slide, please. But first, I'd like to talk, next slide. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about local government's place in the constitutional framework in South Africa. Now, South Africa is a constitutional democracy as established in our 1996 constitution. Government consists of 3 spheres. Most other parts of the country, they refer to them as levels or tiers, but for some reason in South Africa, we call them spheres. We have the national sphere, provincial sphere, and the local sphere. Now, the existence of our 9 provincial governments and their functions are guaranteed by the Constitution, and whilst the existence of our 257 individual municipalities is not guaranteed, the existence of local government and its functions and powers as a sphere of government are indeed guaranteed. So whilst we tend to talk of South Africa as a unitary state, you'll see that it does have fairly strong federal elements as well. Next slide, please. The 1996 Constitution placed local government at the forefront of South Africa's developmental agenda. The Constitution states that local government's objectives are, firstly, to provide democratic and accountable government for local communities, to ensure the provision of services to communities in a sustainable manner, to promote social and economic development, to promote a safe and healthy environment, and to encourage the involvement of communities and community organizations in the matters of local government. Now, next slide, please. Executive and legislative authority of a municipality is vested in its municipal council. It's important to remember that. Municipal councils are elected every 5 years according to a mixed proportional representation and ward system. So half of the councillors in any municipality are elected from party lists in proportion to the vote which that party gained in the election, and half are elected individually to represent wards or voting districts, although in practice, most ward councillors have some or other party affiliation as well. The council is chaired by a speaker, and the political head of the council is the mayor, who may either be an executive mayor, who is elected by the council and is supported by a mayoral committee appointed by him or her, or you could have a non-executive mayor who chairs an executive committee elected by the council. In the latter case, it's actually the executive committee which holds the power, whilst in the former case, it's the mayor who holds the reins of power. Next slide, please. Now, municipal councillors are responsible for oversight in the municipality. In particular, councillors are responsible for developing policies and ensuring that the policies and resultant programs are implemented. On the other hand, it is the role of the officials to implement those policies, and the Constitution sets out the basic values and principles which govern administration in all 3 spheres of government, including the local sphere. Now, it follows that the success of any policy will largely be determined by the relationship between the councillors and officials. Next slide, please. Sadly, however, South Africa's local government record has not been impressive at all. Service delivery is often poor and sometimes almost non-existent. Generally, local governance is weak, although there are some exceptions. And the reasons for this state of affairs, as is usual in South Africa, are many and varied, and the list I'm about to give you is by no means exhaustive, but I guess amongst the most important are the following. Firstly, there's a lack in South Africa of technocratic skills, which are necessary to give effect to this developmental agenda. Secondly, there's a lack of resources, particularly financial resources, although I suppose that is a complaint of local governments around the world, but it's particularly loud in South Africa. Thirdly, we have a lack of senior government support. In terms of our constitution, both national and provincial governments are supposed to provide support to local government, but in many cases that support is lacking. There's also a lack of effective accountability mechanisms. We have plenty of accountability mechanisms, but they're not effective for the simple reason that they are not implemented. As a result, there are no consequences for transgressions. And generally, in all spheres of government, there is a lack of political will to make local government work. But one of the reasons, and important reasons, and the one that I'm going to be focusing on now, is the erosion of the politico-administrative interface. Can we have the next slide, please? Many councils are unable to achieve an appropriate interface between administration and politics. And this is despite a legislative framework which attempts to separate the political and administrative components of municipalities. So we have a host of legislation, for example, the Municipal Structures Act, the Municipal Systems Act, the Municipal Finance Management Act, which all, in one way or another, or to a greater or lesser extent, try to allocate roles and functions to the two arms or the two components of the municipality, being the political and the administrative wing. Next slide, please. So, local government, I should also mention, in South Africa is highly politicized along party and party factional lines. And here it should be mentioned that most local governments have been dominated over the past 20 years since we've had this new system of local government by the same party, which gives rise to a rather incestuous relationship between party politics and administration. We have inappropriate party political interference, which has complicated the politico-administrative interface to an enormous extent. In South Africa, this means not only councillors exerting undue influence over officials, but also, interestingly enough, vice versa. And as a result, tensions have arisen in the local sphere of government in particular, in other spheres as well, but in particular in the local sphere of government between politicians and administrators. Next slide, please. Now, the causes of this situation, again, are many and varied, and the list I'm going to give you is not exhaustive, but they're perhaps amongst the most important. We have undue influence of national or regional party political structures over local councils. In other words, the local or regional party office will try to influence the council. Now, remember, this is important because in terms, excuse me, of our constitution, legislative and executive responsibility vests in the council. No one else is supposed to interfere with what the council decision is other than in terms of the law. We also have the problem of councillors and senior managers in the municipality being members of different political parties. Now, which in a democracy in itself need not necessarily be an issue, but in South Africa it has given rise to problems of all kinds. And perhaps even more problematic, we have a situation of councillors and senior managers being members of the same political party, which gives rise to leadership role clashes. So, for example, you'll have a reversal of seniority in municipal roles versus party political roles. For example, you'll have a municipal official who is subordinate and accountable to the mayor in the municipal context, but may hold a senior position over the mayor in the local party structure. So your municipal official might be subordinate to the mayor, but when it comes to the party structures, he might, for example, be the chair of the regional or local office, whilst the mayor might simply be the treasurer. And this gives rise to all kinds of tensions. And this manifests in various ways. Sorry, next slide, please. You'll find external political structures dictating to officials. You'll find external political structures influencing the removal of non-compliant officials from office without cause. You'll find procurement processes influenced by councillors, which is actually forbidden by law or by external party structures. And you'll have interference by external political structures in councillors in the selection and appointment of ordinary staff, which is supposed to be a purely administrative function. Next slide, please. Even more problematic, you'll have external political structures influencing or dictating to councils regarding the appointment of senior officials. Now, I guess this happens all over the world. In South Africa, we have a particular word for it. It's called cadre deployment. And this will happen when your regional party structure will dictate to the council whom that council should appoint, for example, as the senior municipal manager. That is supposed to be a council responsibility, but it's now been taken over by your party, external party structure. It has, by the way, been declared illegal by our courts, but it's a practice that nonetheless continues. You'll also find officials who are high in the party hierarchy influencing decisions that should be the preserve of councillors. So that vice versa situation, which I mentioned earlier, is quite apparent as well in our system of local government. You'll find also that internal disciplinary processes that are carried out in municipalities are being used to settle political scores. And conversely, you'll find officials and councillors turning a blind eye to each other's transgressions. Next slide, please. Now, this situation which I've described provides enormous potential for a host of ills which decentralizers often warn about and which have actually come to reality in South Africa. So you have, for example, in South Africa, clientelism, which is widespread in local government. You have nepotism. You have factionalism that spans the politico-administrative divide. You have tender or procurement irregularities on a monumental scale. You have low staff morale. You have high staff turnover. You have an undermining of accountability, and you have an undermining of governance generally, and this is particularly evident when it comes to financial governance. The result of all of this is that you have poor or non-existent service delivery, which is the reason for these municipalities existing in the first place. In other words, so many of them have failed in their duty to the citizenry. Next slide, please. Sorry, next one after that. So what can be done? Now, we've tried a lot of solutions in South Africa. We've tried endless capacity and awareness building programs of the roles of the various components of municipalities. It's been suggested that there should be clear legislative definition of roles and responsibilities of councillors, especially councillors who happen to be political office bearers and administrators on the other hand, that there should be stricter enforcement of accountability mechanisms. There should be stronger intervention and oversight by national government, which, as I suggested earlier, has to some extent abandoned its responsibilities as far as local government are concerned. And there should be stricter enforcement of legislation limiting the involvement of politicians in administrative roles. I might just mention that we do in fact have a legislative provision which specifically prevented senior party officials from holding senior management roles, although that legislation was for technical reasons declared invalid, but that's another story. Next slide, please. So these are the kind of solutions which have been suggested, but I'd like to propose that maybe throwing technocratic and legalistic solutions at what is essentially a political issue is not the answer. More useful, I would say, is the fostering of a culture of political will and accountability. But that's always difficult to achieve, but we have to keep striving to do that. Otherwise, our local government project in South Africa will have failed. Now, it's not a pretty story, but I think it has to be shared in the hope that it can provide lessons to other countries embarking on decentralization processes and provide warnings as to what can be avoided. I hope that is of use to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sadel, for the excellent presentation. Actually, I do echo that the constitutional and legislative framework for the local government, not only in South Africa, but in many other countries, envisages a clear separation of the function of the political and the administrative component. However, this distinction is often not observed or exercised. Thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Dr. Hani.
Distinguished guests, the relationship between legislative bodies and chief executives almost always involves some measures of both ambiguity and tension. This is especially so at the level of local government, in part for historical reasons, and in part because at the local level, the responsibilities of the different branches of government can more easily become unclear. It's my pleasure now to give the floor to Dr. Rosenbaum, who will explore why this is happening, what the consequences are, and what can be done about it. Alan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you to the organizers, and thank you, Hani, for this opportunity to share a few minutes with you and a few thoughts. Before I go into my formal presentation, I do want to make a couple of comments kind of in response to the question that was asked, why would it be useful for G20 countries to focus on local government and strengthening local government? And certainly the point made about improving the quality of service delivery is very important, but I think there are two other really critical variables as well. One is the importance of local government in terms of economic development. I mean, if you look at and compare parts of the world in terms of economic development and parts of the world in terms of the strength of their local governments, there's a very, very close correlation. Where local governments are strong, where they involve a good deal of the spending of the country, that's usually a country in which there is very strong economic development. The other point that I want to make, and this is one that I'm particularly sensitive to at the moment, is the importance of local government in dispersing political power and governmental authority. As some of you probably have heard, we've recently had a presidential election in my country. That election was overseen by close to 8,000 different local jurisdictions that run their local elections. I have absolutely no doubt that if we had a highly centralized system in which the Department of Justice, Ministry of Justice, or the Ministry of Interior were running that system, the results would have been perverted with this current administration. So I think one of the great strengths of local government and decentralization is that it does disperse political power so significantly. And I think that, and I would just comment in that regard to our colleague from South Africa, that in our country, we've been working on building our local governments for 400 years. So I think with time, your situation will, I suspect, improve significantly. Now, in terms of our situation, just about anything that has been said so far can be said about the U.S. system of local government. Even, for example, I noticed the comment about the smallest municipal council being 2 people. We have one municipality in the United States that only has a population of 1. So I suspect their municipal council may be smaller, even than the 2 that was mentioned. We are a country that is, just because of this history, because local government preceded colonial government, preceded state government, preceded national government, we have a very massive local government sector. In terms of municipal and traditional municipal type governments, we have about 35,000, 3,000 county governments, but equally significant, we have 50,000 special local governments, special district governments, many of which, deliver only one particular service. Some of them cross municipal boundaries in doing that. But when you put all this together, we are talking about 85,000 local governments in the United States. And in contrast, it's interesting if you don't count, village type governments in India and China, you will find that your Asia, Africa, and Latin America together only have about 65,000 local governments, where we have in this one country 87,000, which means obviously there is a lot of tension, if you will, between, or potential for tension between our executive branches and our municipal councils. Now, we have technically 4 different forms of local government in the United States. 2 of them are highly prevalent. The typical mayor-council form of government, which is the historic one, and the council-manager form of government that emerged in response heavily to the progressive reform movement that captured a lot of influence in this country in the periods roughly from about 1890 to 1915 or so. And the council manager obviously is more like a parliamentary type system, where you have a council that appoints the chief executive, who is a professional manager. The mayor-council system is one where you elect a mayor, and there is a separate elected council. There are many variations, as you might imagine, across 35,000 municipal arrangements. There are many different variations on the strength of the council versus the strength of the executive. But I guess what one can say is, in general, the mayor-council form tends to be more predominant in our larger cities, and also tends to have more conflict inherent in it. Not surprisingly, if you have a council that appoints and can fire the chief executive, the professional manager, there is a strong incentive, obviously, for the professional manager to work in as collaborative a fashion as possible with the council. And data shows this. If you do survey data of our council members in mayor-council forms of government and in council manager forms of government, generally you find that the council members within the council manager form indicate closer working relationships and less conflict than you find in the mayor-council forms. Although the truth of the matter is, generally speaking, the survey results that we have suggest that even in the mayor-council form of government, the level of conflict is not particularly high. In council manager forms of government, about 80% of the council members generally say that they have a good relationship with the executive. In mayor-council forms, it's about 64%. So you still have 2/3 of the council members indicating that they feel they have a good relationship with the council members, between the council members and the mayor. Now, what produces conflict? Well, obviously, budget issues. I mean, one of the things that is characteristic of U.S. local governments is they have a great deal of flexibility in terms of revenue raising, and they spend a lot of money. The last data that I could find readily was that in 2010, our local government spent $1.4 trillion collectively. Now, of that, 500 billion is transfer payments, heavily oriented towards our schools. Schools are run by local governments, but there you have a situation where about half of the school revenue comes, or close to half of it comes in grants from the states. Local government grants for general purpose governments is a much, much smaller percentage. And in general, our local governments do have, within frameworks established by the state legislatures, and again, as many of the as for instance, Australia's case is an illustration as well. It is our state governments, in our case, our 50 states, that define the rules for our local governments and how they function, their structure, etc. Local governments, in spite of the fact they precede the U.S. Constitution by close to 150 years, are not mentioned in the U.S. Constitution. So it is very much a function of what the states agree to. But most states, for the most part, give a good deal of flexibility to their local governments within some boundaries for raising revenue. And there are many different sources of revenue available to our local governments, heavily dependent upon property taxes, but also in some cases, sales taxes have been allocated by states to be used by local governments, and in a few cases, even income taxes. One issue that obviously involves some measure of conflict between councils and executive is the question of setting tax rates and allocating revenue among departments. Now, many of our cities, most of our cities, are in fact nonpartisan elections for council and mayor. But in the larger cities, there is clearly a recognition of partisan differences, and those also come into play somewhat in terms of where conflict does exist between mayors and councils. Also, in many of our nonpartisan elections for councils and mayoralties as well, there are obvious factions and progressive reformers versus more establishment type groups. And that also becomes an issue in terms of relationships between councils and chief executives. Also, there's the issue of ethnicity, which obviously, especially with the events of this past summer in so many of our cities, in terms of issues of demonstrations against inappropriate police practices and the like, and some of these demonstrations obviously becoming out of control and becoming violent type activities, although not nearly as much as some has been suggested. Those kinds of issues also indicate or produce some measures of conflict. By the way, I totally lost track of time.
2 minutes left. 2 minutes left.
2 minutes? Okay, good. I thought I was maybe running over time. Also, increasingly issues, especially, I was going to say, especially in our larger cities, but not only just in our larger cities, increasingly as issues of economic development, in particular, economic development strategies come into play. And often that involves the question of development, more increasing development activities in terms of commercial activities, in terms of expanded housing type opportunities versus issues of conservation, for example. Those are issues that are increasingly conflictual ones in especially in our larger cities. Issues of environment versus economic development and the like. So there are, I would say, growing tendencies towards more conflict between legislative bodies at our local levels, municipal councils, and chief executives. But generally speaking, in most cases, these conflicts are kept to a relative minimum and often consensus type relationships develop.
Thank you.
And I think I will stop at this point. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Alan, for the thought-provoking concepts on why one of the two main forms of the U.S. local government is more prone to executive legislative conflict than the other, and what tends to produce that. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are thankful to our distinguished speakers to share their thoughts with us this evening. And now, if you allow me, I will open the floor for a 5-minute Q&A session, because actually we are running out of time. The question is for Alan. Are local councils becoming more or less influential in shaping local policy?
The answer, I think, is yes, in part because the issues are becoming more complex. And I think there is more, people are using local council positions also more to advance their own political careers. And I think in part because of that desire to advance their political careers, I think council members are becoming more outspoken, seeking more higher profile positions. And this is especially true in our larger municipal jurisdictions.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Muhammad Al-Ghudairi, the question is for you. What have the municipal councils contributed to the municipal work?
Thank you, Dr. Hani. I think the participation, in particular, in prioritization of municipal services and projects within the council could be a critical issue for councils, and as well the needs of the local communities of municipal services are felt in these councils and reflected in programs and projects. This has been actually a real practice for the councils. Also, the follow-up on the implementation of municipal projects and services in accordance with the approved, of course, operational plans also have been one of the main functionality for these councils. In addition to that, actually, they have been contributing to the to address the causes of project failures and discuss them seriously with the municipalities and trying to find out solutions for this and why and how we can resolve any failures in the future. Also, they have been trying to increase the efficiency of the municipalities, utilization of its properties and resources.
The point is clear. Thank you, Dr. Muhammad. If you allow me, the last question for Dr. Sedel, please, in less than 1 minute. To what extent do external political structures influence the administration of a municipality? 30 seconds, please. 30 seconds, Dr. Sedel.
Okay. Political factors inevitably will affect the administration of the municipality. It has been shown over and over again, certainly in our country, that it does so, and the consequences, I think, are being felt by us at the moment. So the short answer is yes, certainly to a great extent. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I close the session, I would like to convey my sincere thanks to all of you for your participation and interactive discussion. I am grateful also to the organizers of this summit for giving us an excellent opportunity to learn the best practices in the field of the municipal governance. With note of thanks to our distinguished speakers and everyone, I close the session, and I look forward to a continued and expanded collaboration in the coming months and years. Thank you very much. Back to you, Mr. Rani.
Thank you.
نشكر الدكتور معالي الدكتور هاني أبو راس على إدارة الجلسة الثالثة، ونشكر أيضا سعادة الدكتور إبراهيم البطحي على إدارته للجلسة الثانية، وكذلك نشكر سعادة الدكتورة سمية السليمان على إدارتها الجلسة الأولى. الآن ننطلق مباشرة إلى الجلسة الختامية، حيث سيكون معنا الدكتور سعادة الدكتور زاهر عثمان وسعادة الدكتور هشام الصغير. تفضل. دكتور هشام عام الإدارة العامة لدعم القرار، مركز البيانات البلدية ودعم القرار في وزارة الشؤون البلدية والقروية، والدكتور زاهر عثمان أمين عام مركز الإدارة المحلية. نرحب بالدكتور هشام.
بسم الله، السلام عليكم. الصوت واضح؟
تفضل يا دكتور. واضح الصوت.
بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. I would like first حقيقة I cannot add any insightful حقيقة in this important event. First, I would like to express my gratitude for all distinguished speakers and moderators and attendees for this insightful views and that shows spread and depth in municipal council practice. This symposium signifies really the important role of research centers and think tank play to link the view and communicating the different experience of municipal council in G20 countries. We are witnessing these days the G20 presidency in our country, where we have inspired the world about the transformation into more open and forward-thinking society while we're building in our heritage and rich past. Ministry of Municipalities and Rural Affairs is committed in its strategic goals toward Vision 2030 to enhance its services, effectiveness, and improving transparency and accountability to meet the expectation of the nation. Municipal councils plays a very important role for community engagement to incorporate the urban decision-making process. This crucial engagement comes into four main pillars, including the information sharing, consultations, participations, and empowerment, which resulting in more transparency and accountability in municipal sectors. In MUMRA, we have put strategic target to increase citizen and household satisfactions and public engagement, and utilizing the important role of municipal council reaching these goals. On behalf of His Excellency the Minister and through the Citizen Support Department and General Secretary of Municipal Councils, I would like really to thank the organization for the organizer for this important event, and I would like to thank His Highness Prince Abdulaziz bin Ayyaf, the chairman of this center, and also Dr. Zahir Uthman, the General Secretary of the center, for organizing this important event. We are sure that the lessons learned and recommendations evolved of this important event will be well articulated and delivered to the decision maker in municipal sectors, and really would like to thank every distinguished speakers again for their contributions. I have been attending most of the sessions, and we have really have a very insightful informations, practice that can help us a lot in our journey in the municipal sectors. Thank you very much again, and looking forward for another events that we can share the knowledge, we can share the practice that can help all the nations in the G20 countries and all in the world. Thank you very much.
شكرا جزيلا لك دكتور هشام، سعيدين بمشاركتك، وليس ردا للكلام الجميل اللي ذكرته عن التنظيم، ولكن من باب الحديث عن الواقع. وزارة الشؤون البلدية والقروية هي شريك في التنظيم، وفي الواقع الشريك المحرك كان الدكتور هشام بمتابعته وبحرصه ومتابعته مع أعضاء المجالس البلدية وتطوير الجدول، فالشكر لك بصفة خاصة. أيضا أشكرك لأنك شكرت بشكل وافي the distinguished speakers. They were the icons of this event. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to do it. I feel guilty that we kept some of them staying so late because of the time difference. في الختام دائما تبدأ الصورة أوضح، وفي وقت ونقاط مرة كثيرة للحديث، ولكن يبدو أنه ما يمكن استيعاب كل ما يتم. ما أدري كيف أن أعبر عن سعادتي بكم المشاركة، كم الحضور والأسئلة، والأهم منها المقترحات الكثيرة اللي جاءت. أنا أعتقد أنها مثرية جدا بالنسبة لمركز الإدارة المحلية، واللي هو أيضا في نفس الوقت سيجير كثير من هذه الملاحظات إلى مقام وزارة الشؤون البلدية والقروية. جاءت أسئلة صراحة يعني يمكن كل واحد منها موضوع دراسة، عن موضوع صلاحيات المجالس البلدية، رفع كفاءة أعضاء المجالس البلدية، نقاط فيها كثير من التساؤلات وكثير منها جاي من أعضاء فاعلين في المجالس البلدية. أتمنى أنه هذه الندوة ستكون نقطة بداية لحوار مستمر ومستفيض في مجال موضوع المجالس البلدية، سواء بدراسة وضع المجالس البلدية في المملكة أو بالاستفادة من التجارب العالمية. دراسة المركز اللي قام بها عن المجالس البلدية في دول مجموعة العشرين ما هي إلا بداية، نحتاج إلى دراسات ربما تفصيلية، حبذا ونأمل أن تكون بالتعاون مع وزارة الشؤون البلدية والقروية. بعض الأسئلة، واحد من الأسئلة كان من بعض الإخوة عن تساؤل عن شهادات الحضور. يسرنا أن تكون هناك شهادة للحضور لمن يرغب، وسيتم إرسالها عن طريق الإيميل مباشرة. بالعكس نحن نحسب ذلك عرفانا لكم بالحضور. الحضور جميعا هم في الواقع بالنسبة لمركز الإدارة المحلية هم قاعدة معلومات مثرية جدا، هم أصدقاء للمركز، نحتاج إلى مزيد من تعاونهم. وأنا أعتقد أنه من المهم جدا أنه ما سمعناه اليوم، ما استفدنا به من المحاضرين ومن رؤساء الجلسات، أثار كثير من الأسئلة وكثير من النقاط اللي لن تتوقف عند هذه الندوة. لم نستطع بالتأكيد أن نجيب على يمكن إلا على جزء بسيط من الأسئلة التي تفضل المشاركين بها، ولهذا فكل من له أي أسئلة إضافية يتفضل بإرسالها لنا في المركز، وستكون مثار اهتمامنا، بالإضافة إلى الأسئلة والمقترحات الأخرى، واللي كما ذكرت أنها هي مثيرة لكثير من التفكير الإيجابي المستقبلي في مجال الإدارة المحلية عموما وفي مجال مجالس البلدية. وهناك حديث كثير الآن عن أنه وزارة الشؤون البلدية والقروية تدرس بشكل مفصل سبل تطوير المجالس. لا أريد أن أطيل، أرجو أن تكون الندوة بمستوى توقعاتكم وتطلعاتكم. أرجو أن نلتقي مرة أخرى ربما بإذن الله في وقت تكون الجائحة هذه زال ما معها، ونلتقي على خير وجها لوجه بإذن الله. شكرا جزيلا لكم.
نشكر الدكتور زاهر وجميع المتحدثين ومديري الجلسات والحضور. نتمنى أن نلقاكم إن شاء الله في ندوات مقبلة بإذن الله. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.